They sent their strongest to crush US, but humanity didn't just fight back. We rewrote the rules of war. Subscribe for more epic HFY tales where Earth never kneels, only rises. They called it justice. That was the word the Empire used when they unleashed their wrath on the colony of New Santiago. Justice for the crime of not compliance. Justice for daring to speak against the will of the throne. A single ship from the 73rd Armada descended from orbit. No warning, no declaration, just fire. Plasma cannons tore through the atmosphere. Skies turned white, oceans boiled, cities vanished. 8 million souls gone in under 11 minutes. Live feeds broadcast across the galaxy showed the destruction in real time. A lesson, the Empire said, let it be known, disobedience leads to annihilation. The child survived by accident. He had been exploring a mining tunnel during the bombardment. When he emerged hours later, the sky was ash and the air burned in his lungs. There was no one left, not even bodies, just shadows scorched into the walls. Remnants of lives vaporized before they could scream. The child didn't cry. He didn't understand what had happened. But as he walked barefoot over blackened glass and bone, he began to feel something deeper than fear. A seed, quiet, dark, growing inside him. It wasn't sadness, it was fury. The Empire expected compliance. They had crushed greater civilizations. Than Earth, they had dismantled species that spanned dozens of star systems. Humans, primitive, backwater, unrefined, not even 1,000 years into interstellar spaceflight, still used kinetic weaponry, still argued about borders and belief. The Empire didn't expect a war. They expected surrender. They got silence. For 2 weeks, not a single message came from Earth. No ambassadors, no cries for mercy, no pleas, nothing. The Empire's analysts called it shock, denial. They said the humans would capitulate once the next colony fell. Some laughed. Some wagered how many more strikes it would take before Earth sent envoys to kneel. But one voice in the Imperial Senate said something different. He had studied humans, a scholar, not a soldier, and he warned, you have not frightened them, you have only awakened them. Still, the Empire sent another fleet, this time to Titan's orbital yards. Another lesson, another purge. But when they arrived, the yards were empty. Every station powered down. Every ship gone. Silence, again, except this time, the silence wasn't passive. It was deliberate. The humans had gone dark. They didn't beg, they didn't flee. They vanished. A week later, an Imperial patrol near Neptune picked up an anomalous signal. A code buried inside ancient Earth Musican, old war anthem played. In reverse, modulated across a quantum band. By the time they deciphered it, their vessel had already lost atmosphere. The hull had been breached. No weapons fired. No alarms triggered. Every crew member dead. No signs of struggle. Their systems had turned against them. The ship's logs showed a brief moment, 6 seconds of footage. A human-shaped figure, encased in black, drifting in zero-G, moving with surgical grace. It looked directly into the camera before the feed cut. No insignia, no name, no broadcast. Just a message scrawled on the inner walls. In blood, we are awake now. The Empire convened its war council. Panic hadn't yet taken root, but unease had. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Primitive species begged. They didn't retaliate. Not like this. Not with precision. Not with silence. They sent a diplomat this time. Not a soldier. A gesture of mercy, they claimed. An offer of integration. After all, the Empire didn't need to kill every human, just enough to remind them who ruled the stars. The envoy never returned. The Empire laughed again. Perhaps the humans ate him. Perhaps they were too stupid to understand diplomacy. So they sent another, this time with escorts. A small fleet, symbolic, not hostile. None came back. What they didn't understand, what they never even considered, was that humanity had already mourned, already suffered, already lost more than any civilization should ever bear. There was no peace offering that could erase the shadows of New Santiago. No apology that could unsee the frozen bodies of Titan's orbital workers. And no threat that could intimidate a species that had clawed its way up from extinction on its own death world. Alone, the Empire had power. Ships that blocked out stars. Weapons that could erase moons. But humans had something else. They had memory. And rage. And unity born not from peace, but from shared trauma. When Earth received the footage of Santiago's end, there were no debates, no bureaucratic delays. Nations dissolved their borders overnight. The United Terran Front was declared before the sun rose again. Scientists stopped their research. Engineers abandoned their prototypes. Everyone turned their focus to one word: retaliation. But it wasn't just a call for war. It was a reckoning. They didn't want to fight for survival. They wanted to punish. To destroy the idea that any empire could erase them. To make the galaxy understand that humans did not go quietly. That every life taken would be repaid tenfold. They began to dig, to innovate. Not with more firepower, but with fear. They built things not meant to exist. They opened the old vaults, the forbidden AI projects, the adaptive viral systems, the disavowed soldiers bred for total war. And still, they said nothing. No broadcasts, no threats, just the quiet forging of vengeance. Across the galaxy, whispers began. On fringe worlds, smugglers spoke of ghost ships and marked vessels, appearing and disappearing without a trace. Stations found abandoned, their crews gone, their data stripped clean. Empire captains began refusing patrol routes near human space. The silence grew heavier, until, at last, the Empire announced a full mobilization. They would not tolerate rebellion. They would not allow insubordination. They would send their greatest fleet, the 73rd Armada, led by Grand Admiral Surin himself. It would be swift, complete, final. They broadcast their arrival to Earth 2 days in advance. Let the humans feel the shadow of their doom. Let them witness the power of the Empire one last time. But when the 73rd Armada reached Mars orbit, they found nothing. Just static, and then, something else, a single repeating signal. Pulsing from a derelict satellite. You came to scare us. You came to break us, but we are what you made us. Welcome to the battlefield. And with that, the Empire's greatest fleet learned the first lesson of war against humanity. Never give the dead a reason to rise. The Galactic Empire didn't rise through diplomacy. It consumed for 12,000 years. It expanded through domination, forcing thousands of species into obedience. Resistance wasn't just discouraged, it was eradicated. Its doctrine was simple: fear maintains order, and order ensures power. Empires didn't negotiate, they demonstrated, and nothing made a clearer statement than glassing a planet from orbit. Humanity was just the latest target, a fringe civilization barely a few centuries into interstellar travel. They had no seat on the Galactic Council, no hypergate access, no control over strategic sectors. In the Empire's eyes, they were irrelevant until they refused to kneel. That refusal made them dangerous not because of their strength, but because of their unpredictability. The Council scoffed at the idea. Unpredictable. They were primitives. Their most advanced warships couldn't outrun a scout corvette. Their AI was fragmented. Their reactors were based on outdated fusion cycles. They still used railguns, ballistic weapons, explosives. One Imperial officer summed it up: they fight with rocks. Another corrected him: they fight like they don't care if they die. That was the first crack in the confidence. Not fear, just confusion. Most species surrendered within days of a show of force. But the humans had gone silent, not paralyzed, not humbled. Strategists didn't know how to interpret that. Historically, silence preceded surrender. This felt different. It felt deliberate. Still, the simulations were run. Wargames plotted over thousands of iterations. The results never varied. Total Imperial victory within 29 days. Human infrastructure would crumble within the first 96 hours. Civilian resistance would be neutralized within the first week. Earth's orbital defenses, pitiful by galactic standards, would offer less than 3 minutes of resistance under a proper siege, their colonies even less. Every model showed a decisive and absolute conquest. And yet, the simulations felt hollow, sterile. Something didn't add up. They couldn't simulate desperation. They couldn't quantify hate. A few dissenters in the Imperial think tanks raised concerns. They had studied Earth history: wars fought over millennia, not for conquest, but for survival, ideology, revenge. They pointed to Earth's own rise, a species that endured ice ages, extinction events, global wars, and still climbed into the stars. One researcher presented a dossier entitled Death World Behavior Patterns, citing Earth as a classic example. His report concluded with one unsettling sentence: every war they fight like it's their last. He was ignored. The Empire had bigger concerns. It wasn't just about humans, it was about precedent. If one species resisted, others might follow. The lesson of New Santiago had to be reinforced. The humans had to break, completely, publicly, and the Empire had perfected the art of psychological warfare. Propaganda was launched across galactic networks. Images of shattered colonies, narratives of hopeless resistance, carefully edited footage of human soldiers being vaporized. The message: no one defies the Empire and survives. But in some corners, the message had the opposite effect. The silence from Earth was deafening and disturbing. Other species watched and whispered. If the humans were broken, where were the cries? Where were the ambassadors offering tribute? Where were the defectors begging for asylum? There were none. Some saw this as ignorance. The humans didn't understand the scale of what they'd provoked. Others saw defiance. A dangerous, contagious defiance. Empires are built on fear. When fear cracks, so does loyalty. If Earth didn't fold, others might rise. The Council urged caution. The Empire responded with force. They dispatched the 73rd Armada not to conquer but to demonstrate, to prove, once and for all, that resistance is not just futile, suicidal. The operation wasn't meant to be a war. It was an extermination. Swift, final. But even as the ships mobilized, doubt crept in. Not among the brass, among the soldiers. The ones studying the human resistance patterns, the ones analyzing intercepted transmissions shortwave, encrypted, sometimes in dead languages, they noticed something off, a pattern. Human communications were dropping off, but not because they were being suppressed, because they were being hidden. Entire networks had gone dark, not destroyed, buried, camouflaged. REPURPOSED. It was as if the humans were removing themselves from the board. Not out of fear but strategy, a junior officer submitted a report warning of asymmetrical tactics. Earth wasn't preparing for conventional warfare, it was preparing for something else, something older, something feral. The report ended with a single word, ambush. He was dismissed. Meanwhile, analysts continued to review footage from the new Santiago strike. One slowed down a frame and spotted something the AI had missed, a pulse of interference from the planet's crust. Just milliseconds. Before impact, not natural, a signal. It suggested preemptive awareness. That Earth knew, that it had allowed the colony to be destroyed, to buy time. No one wanted to believe it, because belief implied intention, and intention implied capability. And capability in the hands of a species willing to sacrifice its own made the 73rd Armada. Very, very vulnerable. But orders were orders. The Empire wasn't afraid. It was arrogant. It believed no one could ever stand against it. And for 12,000 years, that belief had held. Until now. In the final briefing before the Armada departed, Grand Admiral Surin stood before the command hierarchy and addressed the whispers. They are human, he said. They bleed like we do. They die like we do. They just haven't remembered. How yet? He was wrong. Humans hadn't forgotten death. They had mastered it. And somewhere, in the cold silence between the stars, Earth waited. Not with fleets. Not with weapons, but with intent. They weren't preparing to win. They were preparing to unmake everything the Empire believed was unshakable, and no simulation could predict what came next. They didn't announce a declaration of war. They didn't hold press conferences or make dramatic speeches. Earth simply moved. Quietly. Purposefully. Every government dissolved its sovereignty within a day. All authority was handed to a unified command known only as the United Terran Front. It wasn't democracy. It wasn't dictatorship. It was survival. Every scientist, engineer, strategist, and logistics expert was conscripted. No applications, no interviews. You had skills, you were drafted. Civilians volunteered, en masse, not out of patriotism, out of fury. The command directive was short, brutal, and final. No negotiations, no compromises, no second chances. The first internal act was information lockdown. Every satellite, comms array, and long-range transmitter was taken offline. The Empire's surveillance grid relied on passive monitoring. So Earth went dark, completely. Not a single detectable signal was emitted. From the outside, it looked like paralysis. From the inside, it was a storm. Buried beneath Antarctica, old black sites were reopened. Projects previously deemed unethical, illegal, or suicidal were dusted off. Files labeled Deadman Protocol, Project Leviathan, Valkyrie Seed, and Silencer Doctrine were authorized. No debates, no delays. These were weapons never meant to see daylight. They weren't built for defense. They were built for revenge. Engineering teams operated in triple shifts. Shipyards lit up the night skies above Mars and Europa. Ships were built not for longevity, but lethality. Cheap, fast, brutal. Most wouldn't last a full battle. That was fine. They only needed to kill once. Artificial intelligence cores once banned for potential instability were reintegrated. Psychotronic warfare platforms were brought online, but capable of hijacking enemy neural networks with tailored electromagnetic pulses. Entire divisions of Earth's last-gen combat drones were melted down to make space for something newer, something smarter, something that didn't need a pilot. Every orbital station was stripped. Civilian infrastructure converted into kinetic weapon platforms. Not missiles, not lasers, just mass. Tungsten rods accelerated to terminal velocity. A cheap, simple way to punch through armor and pride. But Earth wasn't relying on ships or guns. The true weapon was fear, and they knew how to wield it. They began seeding false signals, distress calls, fragmented transmissions, ghost fleets. Mimicking retreating vessels, they infected Imperial comms with psychological triggers, subtle, invasive phrases designed to create subconscious doubt. They're already here. You were never safe. The silence is watching. It worked. Empire scouts began reporting phantom sightings, ships that didn't exist, engagements that never happened. The data didn't match, but the fear did. Meanwhile, underground labs in the Siberian basin activated human enhancement programs. Soldiers weren't trained, they were reconstructed. Neural latency cut in half. Bone density increased by 240%. Pain thresholds removed. Oxygen dependency lowered. Field tests killed over 100 volunteers. No one complained. The ones who survived weren't soldiers. They were weapons. The first unit deployed was codenamed Graveborn. 12 men and women. Zero hesitation. They weren't taught tactics. They were shown objectives and left to improvise. The result: 3 ships destroyed, 1 station sabotaged, 0 survivors. No footage, no evidence. Just a whisper left behind and blood on a steel wall. We remember, this wasn't war. This was a ritual, a sacrifice of every principle humanity had ever clung to in exchange for vengeance. And Earth wasn't alone. Unaligned species, those not under the Empire's boot, but close enough to feel the tremors, began to watch. Some sent scouts, others sent encrypted condolences. A few even sent supplies, anonymously. Not because they loved humans, but because they saw what was coming, and they wanted to be on the right side when the flames rose. The Empire, still unaware of the scope, dismissed the resistance as noise. They saw the sabotage. They noted the comms interference. But they thought it was desperation. They didn't know the humans were just warming up. One captured transmission leaked to Imperial intelligence. It was short. 9 words. We are not here to survive. We are here to erase. Empire war councils debated the meaning. Some called it propaganda. Others worried it implied a willingness to go beyond total war. Mass extinction. Scorched star systems. A few even suggested retreat. They were silenced. Back on Earth, production hit critical mass. Ships were completed in half the time of standard Imperial cruisers. Were they beautiful? No. Efficient? Not really, but they were unexpected, and they were fast. Faster than they should have been, not because of better drives but because of risk. Human engineers pushed beyond safety parameters. Overloaded systems. Removed regulators. They built ships like they had nothing to lose because they didn't fleet. Command didn't waste time naming vessels with pride or ceremony. They named them for the dead. For lost colonies. For fallen cities. Santiago's Wrath. Glass Mars. Eulogy 9. Each name was a scar. Each launch was a funeral. On Luna's far side, a new command hub was completed. Buried, hardened, isolated, not to protect it but to isolate what it housed. A quantum warfare AI known only as Ni. It had no personality, no ethics modules. Just one directive: end the Empire. It calculated probabilities, deployed assets, anticipated psychological fractures within the Empire's command structure, and it was never wrong. Because it didn't care about winning battles. It cared about making the enemy break. Some thought the war would take years. Necros gave Earth a timeline of 312 days. After that, either the Empire would fall, or humanity would not exist. There were no in-betweens, and everyone on Earth understood. This wasn't just war. It was the last answer of a species that had been told, for the last time, that it didn't belong among the stars, and now it would write its name into the void in blood, steel, and silence. The 73rd Armada moved with certainty. 12,000 ships, 3 dreadnoughts, 2 world killers, and a swarm of escort fleets blanketed the approach to Mars. The Empire had never committed such force to a single system before. But the message had to be unmistakable. Defiance ends now. Their expectations were clear: human resistance would crumble in the first engagement. It didn't. Mars didn't answer hails. There were no threats, no defense grid activation, no targeting systems coming online. The orbital platforms were dead, cold, silent. At first, Imperial commanders laughed. They assumed surrender. They assumed fear, but the readings didn't make sense. Mars' atmosphere was saturated with anomalous particle emissions. Sensor drift was extreme. Long-range scans couldn't pierce the haze. Internal diagnostics began glitching. Dozens of ships reported nav errors, malfunctioning interfaces, and corrupted communications. Then a distress beacon activated. It wasn't human. It came from one of the Empire's own patrol corvettes. Last seen 3 months prior near the Jupiter relay. Lost, presumed, destroyed. The beacon blinked, then transmitted a single data burst. One image, not of the ship, not of the crew, of Earth, covered in red sigils, drawn in what appeared to be blood. Moments later, half the fleet lost, comes with their central command. Orders were scrambled, coordinates flipped, escorts collided. A battleship discharged its weapons into nothing. Then silence returned. What the Empire failed to understand was that humans didn't plan to match their strength. They planned to scramble. Information warfare, not brute force. They corrupted sensor arrays, looped internal data, injected viruses into Imperial mainframes via quantum echoes. Empire ships began misidentifying each other as threats. Internal turrets fired on crew. Automated repair drones sealed hatches while Marines suffocated inside. The first real strike came without warning. A detonation inside the main hangar of the Dreadnought Pillar of Obedience. No launch, no projectile, just sudden, controlled destruction. When they investigated the wreckage, they found remnants of a human device barely larger than a suitcase. No propulsion, no drive. It had been hidden inside Imperial supply shipments weeks ago. 6 hours later, a coordinated attack hit 3 more ships, not from outside, from within. Human infiltration teams had boarded unnoticed, using suits that mirrored ambient radiation signatures to mimic void. They had waited for days, weeks, inside bulkheads, in silence, and when the moment came, they moved. One team disabled an entire cruiser's reactor by reprogramming its maintenance bots to sabotage coolant flow. Another team released a neurotoxin, synthesized specifically for the respiratory biology of the Imperial species. 52 officers died before the toxin decayed. The Empire had never fought like this. Their strength was overwhelming force, precision, clarity. The humans brought confusion, chaos, psychological collapse. Crew members began questioning reality, wondering if the people beside them were real or infiltrators. One ship purged its own lower decks without cause, fearing infection. Paranoia spread faster than any virus. Then came the Nightingale Protocol. Earth's Black Ops AI activated a preloaded subroutine across hijacked satellites positioned in the belt. Using directional M-bursts, it hijacked the optical nerves of any crew near unshielded windows. They saw things that weren't there. Fleets that didn't exist. Messages written across stars. Some screamed. Some collapsed. Some begged for forgiveness from people who weren't present. The human corvettes, quiet, invisible, slipped through the madness. They didn't attack directly. They planted charges, spoofed signals, redirected friendly fire. One cruiser ejected its escape pods and opened fire on them, believing they were Earth warheads. The pods were full of its own wounded. By the time the Empire understood what was happening, 9 ships were gone. 23 more were disabled. Command hierarchy fractured. Orders contradicted each other. Surveillance logs were corrupted. Tactical AI suggested retreat, but it wasn't over. The humans launched their second wave, not weapons, but code, a virus carried by the Empire's own COM relays. It mimicked standard firmware updates and was impossible to detect until it was too late. Suddenly, propulsion systems began to stall. Reactor outputs dropped. Shields blinked in and out of sync. Internal lights strobed erratically, triggering panic. One dreadnought attempted to fire its main cannon at an approaching anomaly. The cannon overloaded. It detonated inside the barrel. Humans hadn't just planned a battle. They had weaponized trust. The Empire trusted its protocols, its command structure, its information flow. Humans corrupted all of it. And finally, when the damage was irreversible, when the 73rd Armada drifted in disarray, humanity made their presence known. A single message echoed across the fleet in clear Imperial standard. Now you bleed. It wasn't a boast. It was a sentence. And the executions began. The human strike teams, previously unseen, activated across multiple vessels at once. Not soldiers, assassins. They used nothing but blades and fire, one kill at a time. No mercy, no warnings, just elimination. Commanders died in their sleep. Generals were found crucified inside their own cryochambers. The bridge of one capital ship was filled with smoke, every officer dead with their eyes gouged out. The humans left no bodies behind, just marks. The symbol scorched into steel, a skull wrapped in thorns. The meaning was clear. This wasn't war, this was punishment. The surviving elements of the 73rd Armada attempted to regroup. They couldn't. Half their ships were disabled. The rest were haunted. No one trusted the data. No one trusted the orders. And no one knew who might still be alive. When the Empire tried to send reinforcements, the relay gates went offline. Not destroyed, rerouted, now feeding false coordinates. Any ship entering would arrive in empty space. Or worse, never arrive at all. In 72 hours. Humanity had reduced the most powerful armada in Imperial history to silence and ruins without fielding a single fleet in open combat, not because they were stronger, but because they were angry, and the Empire had forgotten what happens when humans stop defending and start hunting. The Empire believed the worst was over, that the humans had thrown everything in one desperate ambush, that the chaos was their peak. They didn't understand. That wasn't Earth's weapon. That was just the bait. What followed next had no precedent, because no species had ever gone that far to win. No species had ever been that furious, that relentless, or that unafraid of the consequences. The Empire hadn't broken the humans. They'd set them free. The first sighting came from the remnants of the 73rd Armada. A disabled cruiser, drifting near the edge of Saturn's orbit, picked up a signature moving at impossible speed. It wasn't cloaked. It wasn't stealth. It simply didn't match any known emission pattern. It boarded the cruiser without opening a hatch. No alarms, no breach, just presence. Within 4 minutes, every member of the command deck was dead. Bodies left untouched. Organs turned to pulp. The internal sensors registered no contact. No sound. Just environmental failure in a 10-meter radius. The last camera feed before blackout caught a glimpse of something vaguely humanoid 7 feet tall, plated in carbon black armor, with no visible eyes. They called it Warburn. Not a name, a classification. Humanity had finally revealed its second layer. The Warborn Project wasn't an army. It wasn't a division. It was a protocol, a decision to build humans, not for defense, but for asymmetrical extinction. These weren't soldiers. They were engineered from birth in closed-loop environments, genetically tailored to withstand the extremes of space, pain, radiation, pressure. No individuality, no voice. Each warbird carried neurochemical inhibitors that blocked fear, hesitation, and remorse. The training regimen had a 94% fatality rate. The 6% that survived were released as instruments of finality. They didn't take orders, they received vectors. Drop zones, targets, then silence. The first confirmed warbird assault occurred on the Imperial outpost of Felix 3. It was a fortified moon with over 15,000 soldiers, protected by energy walls and automated defenses. In theory, it was impenetrable, but no ships approached. No arbiters appeared. The groundquake lasted 6 seconds. The sensors failed in 4, and by the end of the first hour, all personnel were dead. Not just killed, erased, nerve centers destroyed. Fuel lines ruptured with surgical precision. Local oxygen atmospheres ignited. The outpost AI self-terminated, unable to process the level of biological loss. The walls weren't breached from outside, they were shattered from within. Forensic reports later recovered by fleeing Empire. Engineers suggested the Warborn had been hiding beneath the moon's crust for over 3 weeks, dormant, waiting for a signal that never came. They hadn't needed it. They acted anyway. The only message left behind was etched into a hangar wall, in molten metal. We are not your mistake. We are your mirror. The Warborn became a myth overnight. Some Empire soldiers claimed they were illusions, that no such units could exist. Others began to abandon posts at the slightest rumor. Entire platoons committed suicide to avoid capture. A single Warborn was spotted walking across the exterior hull of a dreadnought during full burn. No suit, no tether. It placed something against the hull and vanished. 23 hours later, that ship ceased broadcasting and drifted directly into a black hole. Empire Command scrambled to understand. How could humans do this? How could a young, fractured, unstable species field weapons this precise, this cruel, this calculated? The answer was simpler than they expected. They stopped caring about survival. The Warborn weren't sent to win the war. They were sent to ensure the Empire never forgot it. Each one was a reminder that no matter how far the Empire ran, Earth would reach them. Not with fleets, with hands, claws, blades. The psychological collapse was inevitable. Reports flooded in from outer sector stations going dark. Fleets abandoning posts, governors requesting asylum from the very species they'd once mocked. One outpost defected, entirely, surrendering to a passing human ship without being hailed. The commanding officer's only statement: "We saw the black one, we heard the breathing." The Empire tried to retaliate with their own enhanced soldiers, genetically modified Elvery shock troopers, psychotronic enforcers, even chemical weapon, drones. It didn't work. The Warborn weren't designed to be better in combat. They were designed to make combat irrelevant. Every encounter ended the same way: silence. Imperial records stopped labeling battles as losses. They began using the word expunged. Then came the Reaper. Broadcast. Earth hijacked the primary relay for the entire Western Galactic Belt. The message was short. No threats, no theatrics. A still image of a Warburn standing above the burned flag of the Empire. The caption: "Your future ends where ours began." It wasn't rhetoric, it was a timeline. The Empire began to fragment. Local warlords rose, trying to establish zones of control as the center failed to respond. Reinforcements never arrived. Supply chains disintegrated. Some tried to sue for peace. Earth didn't answer. Others tried to buy time. Earth didn't slow down. They weren't waging a campaign, they were performing a funeral. And every Warburn deployed was another tombstone hammered into the bones of a regime that thought it understood fear. But Earth had lived with fear its whole existence, and now, they had become it. It started as whispers, small rebellions flaring at the Empire's edges. Minor species, long subjugated, began refusing orders. Trade convoys vanished. Garrisons went dark. At first, the Council blamed coincidence, then sabotage, then human manipulation. But the truth was simpler. For the first time in living memory, someone had hurt the Empire. Someone had not just resisted but struck back. And they hadn't stopped. That alone broke something ancient and deep. Fear had kept the galaxy in line for 12 millennia. Humanity cracked it in weeks. On the mining world of Veltarune, slave workers stopped production and simply walked off. No uprising, no speeches, just abandonment. When Imperial enforcers arrived, they found the overseers nailed to the refinery gates. Not one bullet fired. The workers wore armbands stitched with Earth's fractured flag. They had never even met a human. They didn't need to. Word traveled faster than ships. The stories weren't coordinated. They didn't come from Earth. They spread themselves. Every victory the humans won, even the ones that didn't exist, grew into myth. Ghost fleets drifting through unclaimed sectors. Stations waking to find Imperial captains hung from their own rafters. Messages written in blood in 100 languages. You are next. The facts didn't matter. The fear did. The Empire tried to respond with increased crackdowns. Entire sectors were placed under military lockdown. Transmissions were censored. Travel restricted. Dissent became treason. But it only proved the humans right. The Empire was bleeding, and it had no idea where the cuts were. In the shadows, humanity had begun building more than weapons. They built alliances, not formal, not structured, just understanding. Alien smugglers began sharing maps of hidden routes. Traders passed along data caches, imperial fleet positions, supply depots, manufacturing nodes. Some of them hated humans. Most feared the Empire more. They saw who was rising, and they made a choice. Earth didn't treat them like tools. They didn't demand fealty or allegiance, just information. In a simple agreement, when the time comes, stand aside. The Empire failed to see the shift. They still believed in superiority, that they could crush this rebellion with enough force. They began reinforcing the core sectors, reassigning fleets from frontier space, pulling resources inward. It was a mistake. Humanity knew the Empire would do it. They counted on it because it meant the outer territories were left exposed. And that's where Earth struck next. Operation Sundagger was launched without a single human ship crossing enemy lines. Instead, rebel cells armed with human technology and trained by exiled operatives sabotaged communications arrays, crippled orbital relays, and opened jump gates to nowhere. The Imperial response was chaotic. They tried to deploy reinforcements, but the jump gates had been to send entire fleets light-years off. Some never arrived. Others reappeared in deep void, out of fuel, out of time. The message was clear. Earth didn't need to be everywhere, they just needed the Empire to think they were. That illusion cost the Empire a dozen sectors. Then came the supply raids. Small, silent vessels with gravity distortion fields hijacked convoys mid-jump. No fire, no battles, just cargo disappearing. Medical supplies, reactor cores, fuel, parts taken without a trace. One convoy reappeared with its escort crews alive but mentally shattered, unable to speak. What they saw was never recorded. What they heard was one repeating phrase. You kept us in the dark. Now we live there. Entire systems began to defect in silence. Governors refusing orders. Military officials reporting fake attacks to stall deployments. Some simply walked away, sending a final transmission. You should have killed them all when you had the chance. The council panicked. For the first time in recorded history, they issued a system-wide declaration of containment. Not just of humanity, but of the ideas they were spreading. Information about Earth, its resistance, its victories was now classified as forbidden knowledge. Sharing it became an executable offense. But suppression failed. Truth had momentum. On the trade world of Varnal, a crowd of 30,000 gathered in protest. The first anti-empire riot in 2 centuries. They waved no banners. They held no weapons. They simply repeated 3 words. Earth stood alone. The Empire responded with orbital strikes. Thousands died. The survivors uploaded the footage to every open network. It went viral across 10 species within hours. Not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. Earth never retaliated. They didn't send aid. They didn't condemn. They just kept moving. Humanity had no interest in inspiring rebellion, but their survival had made it inevitable. The more the Empire tried to erase them, the more visible they became. One transmission, traced to a hidden relay near the galactic rim, lasted only 7 seconds. A human voice, flat and unshaken, said, "We're not coming for your worlds. We're coming for your throne." That changed everything. For the first time, the Empire saw the end of itself, not as a possibility, as a trajectory. Because this wasn't a war for territory. This was a war to dismantle the idea that anyone could rule by fear. And the humans weren't stopping. They weren't even slowing down. The turning point came without warning, without fanfare. Not from a battle or a broadcast, but from silent, systematic, suffocating silence. The Empire's central relay hub at Noraxis 9 went dark. Not destroyed, not attacked, just gone. The entire communication grid that spanned over 30 sectors collapsed in under 3 minutes. Automated repair attempts failed. Backup nodes never activated. The Empire's largest neural AI went blind overnight. No one saw the breach. No one found the intruder, but a timestamp embedded in the final data fragment. Read, "We learned from your machines. Now ours dream of fire." The loss of Noraxis 9 was catastrophic. Fleet coordination failed. Resupply missions stalled. Emergency beacons looped in static. Entire sectors were cut off and isolated. In the void, paranoia spread like plague. Captains questioned every order. Some refused to move without direct contact from the core. Others fled their posts, convinced they were already surrounded. Humanity had built no fleet large enough to encircle the Empire. But it didn't matter. The illusion was complete. Fear was the new gravity. Earth's next move was as brilliant as it was brutal. They activated Protocol Mirfall. It wasn't an attack, it was reflection. The humans began transmitting the Empire's own classified files to public networks across the galaxy. War crimes, genocides, chemical sterilizations, treaties broken, species culled, planets terraformed without consent. All of it timestamped, verified, impossible to refute. Some were millennia old, others recent, but all shared one thing: the Empire's signature. The truth didn't just wound it, shattered. Worlds that once submitted, quietly now rose with vengeance. Refugees poured into rebel-held sectors, defectors, shared codes, maps, insider positions. The humans didn't ask for it, they didn't need to. The Empire had ruled for so long by fear that the moment its mask cracked, the flood couldn't be stopped. Then came the collapse of the Calvin Accord. Once the Empire's strongest alliance, it fractured in days. The Valeri, a warrior species, once known for their loyalty, declared themselves neutral. Their high chieftain issued a single statement: "We do not fight for tyrants who hide behind silence." Immediately after, Valeri ships began purging their ranks of imperial advisors. Some were executed on live broadcast. The message was unmistakable: Earth wasn't just winning the war, they were turning enemies into witnesses. Desperation finally broke the Council's last restraint. They activated the Zeroth Protocol, a weapon buried so deeply in secrecy it had become myth even among the high command. A construct known only as Oblivion Engine, not a ship, not a fleet, a planet killer, one of only 3 ever built. Powered by a chained singularity core, capable of erasing life across an entire solar system in one discharge. Its destination, Sol. The Empire wanted to end the war with a single demonstration, not negotiation, not conquest, annihilation. If Earth wouldn't surrender, they would be vaporized. No terms, no warning, but the Empire miscalculated. Again, they assumed humanity hadn't seen it coming. What they didn't know was that Sol had already been emptied. 2 weeks prior, every major civilian population on Earth had vanished. Entire cities, evacuated through deep jump portals no one knew existed. Earth itself, still present on the charts, was no longer the capital of human resistance. It was a lure, a trap. When the Oblivion Engine arrived, its targeting systems began to fail. Not from attack, from interference, artificial gravity anomalies. Data loops that scrambled its core directives. Aboard the command deck, Imperial officers discovered the source too late. Earth had left them a gift. Beneath the crust of the planet, buried in layers of synthetic shielding, was a network of AI clusters broadcasting corrupted command strings directly into the engine's primary logic grid. It wasn't being destroyed, it was being rewritten. The Singularity Core stabilizers failed. One by one, the containment fields collapsed. The final sensor readings from the engine recorded a whisper in over 4,000 languages: "This is your inheritance." And then it detonated, not aimed outward, but inward. The implosion ripped a hole in space large enough to drag in 2 moons and half the Imperial task force before sealing in a gravitational crush. Earth, scarred but intact, remained as a monument to resilience. The Empire lost more than a weapon that day. They lost the illusion of control. The high command went silent. Not officially, just gone. Communications ceased. Orders stopped. Some say they destroyed themselves out of shame. Others believe they ran, scattered across deep space, in vessels untraceable even by human tech. But in truth, it didn't matter. The galaxy no longer listened. Without command, the Empire's vast machinery began to disintegrate. Regional governors declared independence. Fleet commanders negotiated truces with rebel forces. Imperial scientists surrendered entire labs in exchange for safe passage. Whole species reasserted their sovereignty. And through it all, humanity remained quiet, not gloating, not claiming worlds they had made their point. They had no interest in building a new empire, just making sure the old one never rose again. After Neuraxis 9's collapse and the failed Oblivion Engine strike, the galaxy mistook the Empire's silence for defeat. It wasn't. Power that old doesn't die clean, it fragments into fanatics. Hardline command shards retreated into fallback networks the central government had forgotten it even built. Systems meant for continuity of extermination campaigns during the Empire's oldest purges. Buried among those was a weapons lattice mothballed for 10 millennia. Under treaty seal, the Sunpiercer erased stellar-lensed particle beams designed to strip atmospheres, flash-ignite oxygen mixes, and leave biospheres as smoking glass. Only 3 operational nodes remained. One was mobile, one was hidden in a dwarf star's corona, one pointed by ancient calibration at Alpha Centauri. Alpha Centauri had become a sanctuary node after Sol was emptied. Evacuees from Earth's surface, allied refugees, medical populations from liberated labor worlds, 4 million civilians under layered shield domes, still building long-term life support when the Sunpiercer keyed in. The strike window was 9 seconds. Local defense grids never fully phased. The beam tunneled through magnetospheric shadow, overran capacitors, and drove a superheated oxygen spike that set the upper troposphere ablaze. Visual feeds show daylight turning into a column of white plasma that ate sky, ground, and the screen band of every open channel. Final transmission from Centauri Control was a whisper through carrier decay. "Hold the line. Tell Sol we kept faith." Then static and a thermal bloom, wide enough to register on deep space cargo scopes. Casualty modeling stabilized 40 hours later. 3.87 million confirmed dead. 97% civilian. Survivors. Fewer than 20,000 in hardened subcrust bunkers, burned, irradiated, and running out of air. Rescue jumps cost 6 ships. Flare residue chewed hull plating like acid. Even warborne entry teams lost 2 operatives to atmospheric. Flashback. The death toll mattered less to the Empire's splinter who fired than the message. You can't hide your weak. We can always reach them. The shock nearly broke the coalition. Refugee worlds demanded dispersal. Some alien delegates argued for negotiated partition-seed human border systems in exchange for non-atrocity guarantees. Warburn Command called that treason. Civilian councils froze. Logistics collapsed under panic rerouting. Necros modeled. Morale failure cascading in under 30 days if no retaliatory parity strike occurred. Humanity had to answer not for vengeance, but to prove sanctuary could be punished only once. Admiral Ida Raines volunteered a solution nobody else would sign. Hit the Forge World, Carthos origin site for the piercers focusing. Medic and replacement coil geometries destroy the tooling and you amputate the weapon. Problem. Carthos sat behind 3 loyalist fleets and a gravity shear field keyed to Imperial genetic credentials. Raines' plan ignored the gate. She stripped an old carrier, packed its spine with captured singularity shunts, and welded a cracked antimatter breeder core to a manual trigger. 1 jump, 1 burn, 1 impact. No return vector. Task Spearfall, translated by piggybacking, residual routing keys stolen during the Noraxis breach, arrived inside the Carthos debris halo upside down relative to local frame, and drove straight through orbital traffic before alarms fused. Raines broadcast nothing until her hull breached the forge mantle, her last wide beam. If we burn, you burn, remembering why. She spiked the breeder, blew the shunts, and collapsed half the planet's industrial crust into its fusion reservoirs. Secondary detonations cooked the metacrystal vaults to slag. 2 sun piercer nodes lost resupply. The third lost calibration. Materials permanently. The blast lit 6 sectors. Imperial telemetry marked Carthos economically More important, every species watching Alpha Centauri. Greaves saw a human commander trade herself for the weapon that killed their families. That changed commitments faster than diplomacy ever could. Veltaroon miners pledged convoy escorts. Valeri withdrew neutrality and offered shock squadrons for outer-ring interdiction. Even black market Hydrax guilds opened their covert med-chains to human wounded. No charge, not loyalty. Alignment of pain. Centauri became sacred ground, not a rally, a reckoning. The glass fields were mapped by orbiting drones. Every crater was named for a lost transport, every melted ridge for a refugee habitat. Memorial packets were pushed across every coalition channel daily at shift change. It wasn't propaganda, it was accountability. Command briefings opened with casualty counts, spoken aloud. No one was allowed to forget what the Sun Piercer cost. Materially, the hit hurt. Human stockpiles were gutted, pulling survivors. Antimatter reserves dipped below strategic minimum. Warburn incubators were behind cycle because medical synth was diverted to burns. Hull plate reclamation crews were stripping wrecks faster than foundries could anneal. Necros recalculated campaign horizons, delay another quarter cycle, and surviving. Piercer nodes could be jury-rigged from secondary optics. Push now, and probability of total Imperial systems collapse rose above 50% for the first time. Bleed, hesitate, and more Centauri events follow. Strike, and maybe end it. So doctrine shifted. No more bleed them dry harassment. No more symbolic strikes. Target priority flipped from attrition to decapitation. Take out throne legitimacy. Command replication, and remaining super Whip-on cores before regrouped, splinters consolidate. Coalition signatories ratified under emergency charter. No claimant. Power may seize former Imperial core assets unilaterally. Governance deferred until civilian survival thresholds recovered. Humanity signed first. That mattered. Others followed. Preparation for the final offensive started in ruins and triage bays. Warburn cells retasked to spear breach corridors. Valeri, shock wings assigned to shield civilian convoys. Hydrax slicers folded into necro subnets to open locked Imperial nav seeds. Migrant engineers from 24 worlds worked in shifts plating the hull of a command platform grown around the skeletal remains of Raines. Carrier keeled the ship that would lead the push bore. No nameplate. People called it Tombstar, quietly, as a promise, not a threat. Alpha Centauri's last broadcast loop still runs on coalition channels at low volume in every war room. Tell Sol, we kept faith. No one mutes it. Not anymore. The Empire wanted to teach terror. All it taught was resolve. Next, the coalition would cross the line between survival and victory. And when they did, there would be no more safe distance, no more hidden nodes, no more superweapons waiting for civilians. The war was about to move to the heart that ordered Centauri burned, and this time, nobody was running. The final phase began not with fire, but with silence. A quiet, too deep to be accidental. Imperial broadcast stations on the inner systems ceased transmissions simultaneously. Subspace monitoring picked up only looped static and ghost pings bouncing off old defense satellites. The Loyalist networks were collapsing inward, shedding control, consolidating what was left into one final bastion, Tarsus Prime, once the political brain of the Empire, now a fortress wrapped in 10 layers of planetary shields and protected by the last of the Loyalist armadas. Necros analysts confirmed it. Everything remaining of the Empire's authority had withdrawn to a single world. Not just fleets and officials, but archives, prototypes, treasury nodes, warbred AI cores, and the Council itself. They had run out. Of sky to rule, Tarsis was the last throne. There was no debate inside the coalition. No second vote. The Warburn Command issued a unified directive Operation Severance, strip the head, shatter the symbol, erase the final delusion that the Empire still had control. Failure meant prolonging the war for decades. Success would force unconditional surrender or irreversible disintegration. The operation wasn't about revenge, it was about finality. Humanity led the charge, not from pride, but responsibility. The Warburn fleets had taken the worst losses, endured the longest under Imperial targeting, and bore the scars of Centauri. Their flagship Tombstar, now completed, carried not just weapons and crew but legacy. The keel still bore molecular residue from Rain's final strike. Every system had been optimized for this moment. It was not the biggest ship, but it was the most precise. It didn't need a second shot. The first wave hit the outer defense net hard and clean. Coalition strike craft used folded quantum mirrors to blind orbital sensors. Valeri shock divisions tunneled through magnetic fields and ruptured secondary shield layers with focused fusion lances. Hydrax commandos executed Lorbit zero-slip insertions and shorted power matrices by injecting nanoplague clusters into reactor cores. The Empire responded like it always had, with overwhelming retaliation, but it no longer worked. Humanity had taught the galaxy how to bleed without breaking. Every Imperial countermeasure was anticipated. Their maneuvers were textbook, their targeting predictable. What once devastated was now absorbed and countered. The coalition adapted in real time, using predictive AI, built from decades of watching the Empire fight the same way. The difference now was simple. Humans weren't just surviving Imperial tactics, they were dismantling them. Inside the atmosphere, the skies were war. Superheated clouds turned to plasma as fusion bursts detonated across the stratosphere. Anti-spikes tried to lock trajectories, but coalition pilots had long stopped flying predictable paths. The Empire deployed its last generation of biomechanical gunships, neural-linked monstrosities designed to think like predators. But those were neutralized too. Humanity had encountered them before. They'd studied the patterns, broken the learning curves, and trained with simulations that bled in every direction. The monsters never stood a chance. Tombstar dropped into low orbit like a falling god. Its hull burned orange as it cut through the thermal sheath, but its shields held. Then came the broadcast. One line, transmitted on every Imperial frequency. Your dominion ends now. No elaboration, no demand, just the sentence that closed 5,000 years of tyranny. Inside the Imperial Palace, chaos fractured leadership. The Council issued conflicting orders. Some demanded negotiation. Others screamed for counter-strikes. None realized how far they'd already lost control. Internal feeds showed Loyalist soldiers dropping weapons and surrendering to approaching Valeri. Servitor droids reprogrammed themselves mid-sequence and rerouted evacuation transports toward coalition ships. Entire neighborhoods inside the Capitol domes deactivated security systems to let human relief squads land. The people of Tarsis had waited centuries under Imperial chains. Many weren't loyalists, they were survivors, hostages to legacy and fear. Now, with shields collapsing and fleets disintegrating, they made their choice. Civilians poured into the streets, waving coalition emblems, defacing statues of emperors, guiding troops past checkpoints. The Empire hadn't ruled them, it had occupied them. An occupation ends when people stop complying. The last defensive fleet guarding the palace perimeter attempted a final stand. 30 ships held formation around a quantum core relay station, hoping to detonate it and sever coalition command for a full minute. That was enough, they believed, to counterstrike. It wasn't. A single Warburn squad penetrated the relay station and rerouted its spike charge into its own fleet. The resulting implosion carved a white hole into the cloud deck and vaporized every last ship in the perimeter ring. With the skies cleared, Tombstar descended. It didn't fire, it didn't need to. Its presence was declaration enough. Warburn troops landed at the Council Citadel and met no resistance. The Imperial Guards had already laid down arms. The Council, cornered in its final vault, still clung to delusion. They offered negotiations. Promises of clemency. Lies wrapped in legal formality. The Warborn commander spoke only once. No negotiations with architects of genocide. Then activated a mobile tribunal. No executions. No trials held in secret. Every counselor was tried by galactic broadcast. Witnesses gave testimony. Survivors recounted atrocities. Evidence from 100 systems was aired in front of trillions. When sentences were passed, no cheers, rose only silence, deep and lasting. The kind that signaled a page had turned. Tarsis fell, not in blood, but in truth. For the first time in memory, the Empire's banners were lowered, not by force, but by consent. No successor rose. No loyalist power structure survived. The central command core of the greatest tyranny the galaxy had ever known was dismantled. In full view of its victims, every server purged, every vault emptied, every secret exposed. What followed wasn't celebration. It was breath held for so long, finally released. Across hundreds of systems, former subject species deactivated defense grids. Refugees began returning home. Coalition ships escorted food and medicine where once they'd carried war. The warborn did not claim planets. They did not plant flags. They only stayed long enough to ensure safety, then left. Humanity's message had never been conquest. It had been memory. They would never forget the Empire. But they had made damn sure the galaxy would never repeat it. The war was over, but humanity didn't vanish into legend. They didn't ascend, disappear, or seize the shattered crown of galactic power. They stayed present, watchful, methodical. The ruins of the Empire were still smoldering, still dangerous. Entire star systems had been engineered to depend on the old regime's infrastructure, which was now in collapse. Economies had crashed. Artificial suns were failing. Food distribution was spiraling toward famine in dozens of sectors. Billions needed help. The Coalition's victory meant responsibility now, not rest. And humanity, unlike the Empire, did not abandon the galaxy when it was broken. Warburn fleets divided into relief divisions. Former destroyers were retrofitted into supply convoys. Nanoforges on Mars were open to all species. Terraformers once meant for conquest were repurposed to rebuild poisoned worlds. No tolls, no demands. No flags planted. Just help, immediate and without condition. That act alone did more than any fleet. It silenced critics. It disarmed skeptics. And it ignited a truth few had ever dared believe. Humanity did not come to rule. They came to prevent the return of rulers. On Tarsis, the former imperial capital, work began not to rebuild the palace, but to erase it. Layer by layer, each stone engraved with tyrants' names was ground to dust. In its place rose the Concord Spirant, open structure of glass and adaptive alloy encoded with the histories of the fallen worlds, the liberated peoples, and the sacrifices that ended the cycle. A monument not to victory, but to vigilance. Every visitor passed beneath an inscription written in every known tongue, never again by silence, never again by fear. Coalition Command was dissolved exactly 30 days after the final tribunal ended, not disbanded by power plays or in fight and disbanded by design. It had never been intended to last. Humanity had insisted on that clause from the beginning. They'd learned what happened when coalitions became institutions, when armies forgot they were temporary, when peace became property. 1,000 representatives returned to their worlds with no empire above them and no orders left to obey. In the void that followed, the unexpected happened. Not chaos, but cooperation. Former subject worlds began forming their own councils. Regional pacts emerged, many inspired by Earth's open governance protocols. Transspecies agreements were signed, trade resumed not under monopoly, but mutual need. Even species that had once warred under imperial manipulation sat at the same tables now. Bonded by a shared truth, they had been played, used, fed to each other as distractions. And humanity had refused to do the same. Some tried to twist the new era into a different kind of empire. Rogue commanders, warlords rising from collapsed fleet remnants, corporate cartels exploiting power vacuums. But they didn't last. Because now, when power centralized, the response was immediate. Not just from Earth but from dozens of liberated species. The lessons had sunk in. Tyranny wouldn't be tolerated, not in any form, not ever again. The memory of what had happened, what had nearly consumed the stars, was preserved not just in archives, but in education. Humanity shared everything. War logs, footage, encrypted imperial files, AI simulations of historical moments. Children across thousands of systems grew up not learning the myths of human savagery, but the clarity of their resistance. Not flawless, not perfect, but relentless in the face of oppression. And that story, that truth, passed on in countless ways. Through song, through art, through the rebuilding of every razed city and the healing of every scarred people. Humanity's fleets were not dismantled, but scattered, small, silent, watching, guardians, not governors. Never stationed in one place long enough to become a fixture, never equipped with planetary authority. If they arrived, it was only because they were called. And when they left, they took nothing with them but respect. On Earth, there was no celebration broadcast, no parade. The planet had lost much, names that would never be spoken again. Heroes buried in deep space or lost in silent stations. Monuments were carved, yes, but personal, quiet. Each city bore a remembrance, not of the war, but of the price. Entire generations had vanished to ensure freedom for people they would never meet. That truth lingered deeper than any anthem ever could. And yet, through all the rebuilding, all the reorganization of a galaxy unshackled, one fact became impossible to ignore. The cycle had been broken not by overwhelming force, not by domination, but by a species the Empire had underestimated from the beginning. The one they thought too fractured, too emotional, too wild to ever pose a threat. But it was precisely those traits: defiance in the face of injustice, fury at betrayal, and unshakable unity in the worst of times, that made humanity the one thing the Empire could never control. In time, the name Empire was stripped from the records, replaced simply with before, a warning to the future and humanity. They did not fade into legend. They became the constant, a reminder etched in every alliance charter, every defense protocol, every declaration of liberty, that freedom is not given. It is defended, it is reclaimed, it is remembered. So, when whispers rose again in distant corners of the stars of control, of dominance, of systems ripe for conquests, those whispers didn't last long, because someone always responded. A signal, a shadow, in orbit, a quiet line on an open channel. We're still watching. And in that silence that followed, every tyrant, every would-be emperor, every inheritor of old nightmares remembered exactly what humans had done, and why no one dared challenge them again.